What would Britain be like today without the National Health Service? Its existence is beyond political debate. Britain's health depends on it. But in the 6 months before it opened its doors 60 years ago, it looked as though it might never take its first breath. Hated and resisted by the very people who would actually make it work, its gestation was the most fiercely contested in British political history. And its many enemies wanted to crush it before it was born. This is the remarkable story of the battle for its life. In January 1948, Aneurin Bevan, the Labour Minister for Health, made one of the most audacious political promises in British history. In just 6 months' time, on July the 5th, free healthcare would be available to every British citizen. The National Health Service was the country's biggest and most expensive social reform ever conceived. Creating it from scratch in mere months would be a race against time, because from the outset it faced bitter opposition. Winston Churchill's Tory party had fought Bevan's bill at every stage in the House of Commons. Britain was bankrupt after the most expensive war in history. How could we possibly afford it? The British papers were predicting disaster. The public would exploit a free-for-all. But the angriest and most passionate opponents of the National Health Service were the very people needed to make it work. The dentists, the surgeons, and most of all, the doctors. Doctors said the NHS would rob them of their independence and their freedom. They were all set for a fierce battle for their survival.
It is we who have the whip hand, not the Minister of Health. He can do nothing without us. Mr. Bevan cannot run a service with a third or less of the GPs.
With just 6 months to go, Bevan's time was short. His enemies were gathering strength. Would Britain's health revolution really see the light of day? Before the NHS, the health of a nation was in a perilous state. 1947 had been one of the coldest winters since records began. Snow blanketed the nation. The Thames froze over. And with the cold came the host of illnesses that every bleak winter is prone to. Those who couldn't afford heating were at serious risk. Something had to change.
This was the thing the public was so scared about and worried about, the question of health, falling sick, the sort of catastrophes that happened in Vans, the economic catastrophe. You know, a man couldn't work, or a woman lost her job, or the kids were sick. How could they face the bills? The NHS was screaming to be done.
For decades, millions of British people had suffered illnesses that went untreated, because going to the dentist, the optician, even the ordinary doctor, cost money that few could afford.
When I was a boy, I lived in King's Cross. It was all tenement houses then. We lived pretty rough. My father had been killed in the First World War, and then my mother died. There was a great flu epidemic or something after the First World War. And I think my mother died of that. It says that on the death certificate anyway. And so I was brought up by my grandmother, who was a widow and had had 13 children, but only 7 survived. I remember once there was a doctor at the corner of our street and I wasn't very well, and my grandmother took me to him. He put me on a table and examined me and so forth and told her what was wrong, and said, well, I'll give you a prescription. And my grandmother, he said, oh, thank you, doctor, how much is that? He said, 6pence. So she opened a purse and gave him 6pence, and he gave it to me. That's what medicine was in those days. I mean, you were dependent upon the goodwill of the doctors.
I remember so well how my father, in the 1930s, had to suffer when there was no such thing as a health service. If you came from the working class, as my father did, the problems then of falling ill were a nightmare, frankly, for most families. Not most families, I think all working class families.
Between the wars, working class children entered the world in a tenement or a back-to-back, freezing in winter, stifling in summer. Conditions that bred diphtheria, measles, scarlet fever. Thousands died from tuberculosis every year. A child who survived until 12 was likely to have rotten teeth, poor bones, and a weak heart, if they survived at all.
We had such seriously ill children, and even worse were the babies who came in with diarrhea and vomiting due to either lack of hygiene or artificial feeding. And they would come in extremis, grossly dehydrated. As a house physician, I had to immediately set up drips, but with a very, very high mortality rate. Every morning we spent some time writing death certificates.
Doctors did work in the slums, but very few. London's East End had just 1 GP for every 18,000 people. In the leafy suburbs, it was 1 for every 250. It is not to every doctor's taste, said one GP, to work 20 hours a day in the slums to earn as much as he could earn in 3 hours in a more congenial locale. Essentially, British doctors in the 30s and 40s followed the money more than the medical need.
I never remember going to the doctor. The doctor always came to us. I'm afraid we were rather lucky in that way. We lived in Golders Green at that time. That was just before the war. And I choked on a chicken bone or a rabbit bone or something. I got it stuck in my throat. And there was a doctor who lived just over the road. And he looked and he couldn't get it out. And he said, oh, well, I'll give you this address in Harley Street. And we went off to some great man in Harley Street, and he looked at me for about 1 minute and got it out. I don't really know how it worked, because I never know how much my parents had to pay or anything, because you didn't sort of talk about it in those circles.
For the majority of the population, healthcare was a matter of charity. Fundraising parades were a regular sight on Britain's streets, drumming up cash for the great voluntary hospitals that provided desperately needed care for the poor.
You had rag days, you had nurses in the street. In St George's Hospital, the matron chose the most alluring, young, innocent-looking girl to stand in the front hall, shaking a box which was the shape of a hospital bed at the end of visiting time.
The hospitals survived primarily on handouts from rich benefactors, but philanthropy alone could never provide all that was needed. Without a radical change, good healthcare would only ever be for the privileged few. There must be another way of organising things, Nye Bevan wrote as a young MP in the 1930s. Born in the South Welsh mining town of Tredegar, he left school aged 13 to work underground in the pits. He saw at first hand what illness amongst the poor looked like, and what it felt like. "My heart is full of bitterness," he once said, "for when I see the well-nourished bodies of the wealthy, I also see the ill and haggard faces of my own people."
He lived in a house like this, really, in Charles Street. His father was a miner, and he died from dust, you know, and I think that got him going a bit as a rebel, that they called him at the time.
I was a member of a large family, and you didn't want to know the days of the week by the calendar. You could tell it by what appeared on the table. Towards the end of the week, the fare was always much more meagre than at the beginning.
Bevan's political ideals were carved out at the coalface. He had seen friends lose limbs in accidents below ground, and his own father had died from pneumoconiosis, a lung disease that killed thousands every year.
Nye Bevan, knowing all the health problems that the miners had, may have led to the National Health Service by his knowledge of their sufferings, and their sufferings were great. I remember taking a history from one miner who said that he was working in a seam at the coalface, an 18-inch seam, a tunnel 18 inches high, along which he lay on his side all day, chipping away at the coalface. And that was hard. That was appalling in the 20th century to think that this was going on.
Yet it was in Tredegar that the seeds of the NHS were sown. Bevan was inspired by a local association that had transformed the lives of miners and their families.
The formation of his idea of a National Health Service, it was actually born in Tredegar, where the local council set up the special, if you like, a kind of a workers' health service there. So the notion of a National Health Service had been burning in his mind for a long time.
Miners suffered regular health problems. Their solution was to group together. The Tredegar Workmen's Medical Aid Society was born, a pioneering scheme providing local health care for just pennies a week.
Most people in Tredegar and the surrounding valleys were members of the Medical Aid Society. They paid £3 a week on their earnings in the pound. If anybody wanted anything at all, they could get it straight away. It doesn't matter what it was. I mean, if you had to go to London, come to the office, bring your certificate in from the medical officer, pay your fare, pay the expenses, and pay for your hospital treatment wherever you went. I mean, we gave them everything they wanted. We had 2 surgeries left, dentist, physiotherapist, chiropody, 5 doctors, and 1 chief medical officer. It was the mini National Health Service. Exactly that. That's what he based it on, as a mini National Health Service.
The nation needs a tremendous overhaul, the Labour Party wrote in its 1945 manifesto. Churchill had led Britain to victory in the war, but when the country went to the polls after it ended, there was a new hunger for social change.
I think we were really in a somewhat elevated moral state. There was a tidal wave of expectation that after the war everything would be different, And that was why we were fighting the war, was for it to be different.
The great war leader was deposed because the population wanted social change, and the NHS was part of the social change.
Clement Attlee's government promised to build a newer, fairer Britain, and Nye Bevan, above all, claimed this was the moment to create a new society. "We have been the dreamers. We have been the sufferers," he said. "Now we are the builders." These sweeping social reforms were attacked by the Tories, and Churchill vehemently opposed Bevan's revolutionary ideas from the start.
It was always personal between Bevan and Churchill. I mean, if you go back to Bevan's opposition to Churchill during the war, when Churchill was the great national hero, in a way, Churchill resented him because he recognized in Bevan a power of oratory and a commanding figure in the House of Commons, challenging to him.
Aged 47, Bevan was the youngest member of Attlee's cabinet, and its most left-wing, a self-proclaimed projectile from the Welsh valleys, and an unashamed socialist.